Okay, so welcome and thank you for joining me for this arts and crafts using invasive plants event. My name is Marissa Bischoff and I'm working as an environmental programs coordinator for the Wild Bird Trust this summer. Like I mentioned a little bit earlier, I'm not a professional artist by any means. I'm actually a scientist by study, but I like art and as a hobby, and I love trying new things, and I'd love to just share that with a few people here. Yeah, so we're just gonna have a relaxed art session. I'm just gonna show you some really basic techniques but that won't stop us from having any creativity through them. Okay. So before we go any further, we want to address the fact that myself and the Wild Bird Trust occupies the unceded territories of the original and continued stewards of these lands, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations here in North Vancouver, where the Wild Bird Trust is situated, and where I'm sitting in Burnaby. This means that these lands and waters were never legally negotiated through treaties or won by war, and this makes most of BC relatively unique compared to the rest of North America. So this is a complex issue that we as settlers and settler descendants need to acknowledge regularly and understand as simply, but also importantly, as the first step in order to begin the process of redress and reconciliation, and as we have been doing at the Wild Bird Trust. All right, so now that the most important part is out of the way, we can kind of move on to what our plan is for the day. So first, I'll give you a rundown on what an invasive species is and how we define them. And then I'll talk about gathering plants, and then moving on to looking at a few techniques we can use with plants to make some arts. And then I'll show you how to make a nature notebook. And then I'll answer your questions at the end. But if you have any burning ones, feel free to kind of interrupt me in the middle. And if I can answer you, I'll try to the best of my ability. Okay, so what is an invasive species? So typically, the first thing someone might describe an invasive species is that it's non-native, and which is usually the case. And as you've probably guessed, a non-native species is one that didn't evolve locally. So it evolved somewhere else with another set of species from wherever it came from, and it was transported here or locally, wherever you are, through unnatural means, so usually through human activity. And because of this, invasives haven't developed the same close interconnected relationships that other native species have made with each other over hundreds of thousands, even millions of years. And invasives also have characteristics that cause ecological damage, often, for example, by contributing to slope erosion in riparian areas because of unsuitable or short root systems. Another characteristic of invasive plants are their tendency to be able to spread quickly and aggressively outcompete native species. I'm sure you've seen areas that have been completely taken over by Himalayan blackberry bushes. For example, if you just look at this picture over here, that's me trying to battle just almost a like solid wall of Himalayan blackberry and reed canary grass, and it's grown almost over my head. So they can be very aggressive, and they grow big as well, especially the Himalayan blackberry. Okay. And they're hard to control because of that reason. And because of this, the fact that they spread over large areas makes it quite costly in both efforts and in the methods that take to control them. Okay, we'll move on. So we get it, invasive plants are bad, but since you can find them virtually anywhere, we want to give them kind of a positive spin. So we're going to use them as an excuse to be creative. So why not, right? They look pretty. All right, gathering plants. While gathering plants, we should try to follow a few guidelines. While we want to have fun, we need to be safe at the same time. So if you're a kid, you want to go with a parent or guardian, or even with a friend, it might be a little fun to go with someone else. It's best not to trespass onto your neighbor's yard, even if they have the biggest Himalayan blackberry bush on the block. Just avoids a lot of problems that you don't want to get into. And we need to respect the parks and green spaces that are designated as conservation areas. So these are places that are set aside for the benefit of wildlife. So please do not pick any berries or take any vegetation of any kind in these areas. So you might want to check that beforehand before you go out to gather. Make sure you know what plant you're picking beforehand as well. Mainly this is because we don't want to be picking native species or rare plants that are native, because that could be a big problem, and we want to keep the ones that are rare and native in the ground. And also we want to be careful around plants that could be toxic or dangerous to touch. So for example, on the left, here's a picture of a pretty hardhack blossom, but we won't pick it because it's native. And on the right is a stinging nettle, also native, and has actually many beneficial uses. But for our purposes, we want to be careful if we're picking plants around it and making sure we don't pick it accidentally, just so we don't get a handful of like stinging needles. No one wants that. So where should I gather plants? Well, the easiest and the best way would to be your own yard, backyard, front yard. And this way, not only are you gathering art supplies, but you're also doing some weeding work at the same time. So it's like a win-win in my book. Next, you can try your back alley, roadsides, ditches, etc. These are places where hardy invasives are often found. Just be careful that, make sure it's safe to approach these places before you go into them. And public areas, as long as we're following those guidelines I mentioned just before. Okay, enough of the preamble, and we'll just jump into some of the techniques I've been doing. The first project we'll cover is leaf rubbings. So like I said, we're here for some simple techniques, and all you'll need are some crayons, or if you're feeling adventurous, some oil pastels or some charcoal or something like that, your leaf of choice, and some paper. Here I use some Himalayan blackberry leaves, and I snip the tiny thorns that run down the middle on the underside of the leaf, in the mid vein, so they don't puncture through the paper. And be careful of the thorns when you pick the leaves. We don't want to get any stuck under our skin. And I place the leaves underneath the paper with the underside of the leaf facing up for the Himalayan blackberry, because the veins are bulging out larger on the underside, and it makes a clearer impression when we start rubbing over top of them the paper. All right, so what you want to do after placing your leaf on the leaves on the pattern that you want, and put it on the paper and put paper on top of them, and start rubbing a crayon over top. You can experiment with the amount of pressure you put on the crayon, or if you use the broad side or the ends of the crayon, you can see different ways that it'll show up on the paper. And here you can see I made a few cards with one leaf, a pattern of leaves, and using different colors. On the card on the right here, I used a few different colors, but I wanted the outline of the leaf to show up a bit more, so I just went over it again with some darker, redder crayon there. And another thing I found, which was really interesting, is if you just use white crayon on the paper, and you go over the leaves, it gives it, you can't see anything, but once you put watercolors on it, it gives a really cool pattern. The wax crayon will reject the paint, so the outlines of the leaf and the veins will show through. It might take a bit of practice to rub the right amount of white crayon over the paper, but I think the results are pretty cool. I have it up here. Okay, any questions? Okay, so we'll go on to the second. Yes, go ahead.
So there's a couple questions in the chat box.
Sure, yeah, let's go. Let's just address those.
Yeah, so Ronnie asked, so for the watercolor, or for the crayon one, do pastel or conte, is that how you pronounce it, work well as well? Is it just crayons?
For the watercolor? I've just seen it used with the crayon, with the watercolor. I've also seen it done with a white candle, just rubbing it over. Actually, I can do a little demonstration right now, actually, if we want to show you. So everyone can see that? Okay, so I have some leaves here. These are bindweed leaves I got from my backyard. And I'm going to put them down on a card here. Down, and just rub like this. Hopefully that works. I only used Himalayan blackberry before. And I got actually my cheap watercolors here. No need to get fancy. Get my watercolors. Yeah. I'm not a big artist, but I'm trying to get into watercolors recently. It's kind of fun. Has anybody else used art for leaf rubbings like this before? No?
Marissa,
Yeah,
have you ever tried it with water-soluble pencil crayons
I haven't, but that's a great
instead of
idea. I
watercolors?
actually have some too. That's a great idea. But I don't know if you can see it. You can kind of see where the wax from the crayon kind of hydrophobic and gets rid of the water there. All right. It's kind of hard to do an art presentation virtually. I'm trying my best. Thank you for your patience. Okay, we'll continue. All right. So we'll go on to the next thing, which is plant prints or stamps. And the first one I did was using spreading like an even layer of acrylic paint over a flat surface. And I just used like a piece of wood or a cardboard would work as well. And then laying a leaf down onto it. For this project, I also used bindweed, the one I just used, bindweed leaves, and patting it down to make sure the paint is on most of the surface of the leaf. And you can use any color of paint you like, and you can mix paints and get more creative than I have here. And then you just press it down on the paper as evenly as possible. Try not to move the leaf around so it doesn't smudge. And then carefully peel the leaf off the paper again, not to smudge it in the process. Then you'll end up with something like this. And then these are my first few attempts though, so with a bit more practice, you can get something a little bit more distinct. And in the middle picture here, I used a few different plants. I used some bindweed flowers, like these white ones over here. And top down and then to the side, and I used some reed canary grass leaves, and on the bottom were some Himalayan blackberry leaves that I tried there. So you can get a bunch of different patterns depending on what plant you use, what weed you use. You can get creative, let's just put it that way. Okay, this was one of my favorite ones actually. I was using washable color markers, and again I used the bindweed leaves, and I just colored the surface of the leaf with the markers in a rainbow pattern before pressing it down onto the paper. And just for a note for this project is just to make sure the ink is still wet before you press it down, otherwise the ink won't transfer, and then you'll just have to do a second coat, which is not the end of the world, but yeah, I like that one. And the next project I did was making quote unquote ink. It was like a watery pigment is really what it was. For this project, I used reed canary grass, as you can see on the left here, and then I used some blackberries to get some pigment from the blackberries there. For the first one, the reed canary grass, I actually made this accidentally. I originally wanted to make some paper from reed canary grass, and I did. But that was a lot more complicated, and for a presentation like this where I wanted to gear it more towards family, I decided to leave it out. But if you are interested in seeing a tutorial on how to make like some craft paper from reed canary grass, let me know in the chat, and then maybe I can record something for everybody later. So I cut the leaves of the reed canary grass, and then I started boiling them in water. And that took maybe an hour or two, and I just boiled the water all the way down, and I collected the water because I figured I could probably use this for something. And I added half a teaspoon of vinegar and half a teaspoon of salt to help with preservation. And basically, this is what it looked like. I have it here. And I could have boiled the water down a little bit more, and it would have gotten more concentrated. But as it was, I just had to layer it quite a few times over the paper to get it to be even this dark, which is still pretty light, but there's ways around it. And like I said, I made this accidentally, so it wasn't even on purpose. And that was actually the result of the paper right after I took it out of the strainer, so it was kind of cool. Yeah, and the next one I made was Himalayan blackberry ink, quote unquote. So what you need is just like a handful of berries, like I show in the picture here, over a bowl in a strainer, and then you just smash it as much as you can until it's almost all juice, and then you put it through the strainer. And then with the collected juice, you put in the salt, half a teaspoon of salt and half a teaspoon of vinegar again. And then that's it. And you just mix it together and you work it, and that's what it is over there. Actually, this is what it looks like when it's dry. It's actually a darker blue, darker violet than is in that picture. So I actually really love this, and I'll probably use it again because I really liked how that turned out. And so I know it's hard to start to recognize plants, but my tip is just to start making a nature notebook, and this can just become another art venture. You can make it into an art nature notebook. Drawing a plant and writing a description will help you to remember what the plant looks like and what its characteristics are, and it'll make it easier for you to recognize it in the future, which is what I found for other things like bird identification. Same thing with plant identification. It's really helpful. So this is actually a raspberry plant on the left here. You can't really tell because it's currently being choked by a huge bunch of bindweed. I've been kind of lazy and weeding it, so that's what's turned out. But I wanted to make a nature notebook and start in that corner of my yard just because there's so much, the bindweed is in abundance there. And that's what the flower looks like close up. It's quite a nice flower, but like we mentioned, it could be nice and pretty, but it's destructive. So here's what you want to do in your nature notebook. I did one for bindweed. You have your dates, your location, the details of like the weather, about the day. You can add other things there. The species name, it can be common name or Latin name. Preferably both would be the best if you want to get to be an expert at this sort of stuff. Like a short description, doesn't have to be like professional, just something small that will help you jog your memory. And then a drawing, as detailed or as artistic as you want. Again, just to kind of jog your memory. And actually, I did a few others, so we can look at them. You can see. You can see, so I did my bindweed. I don't know if anyone can see that. And then I did my reed canary grass similarly. And then I did also Himalayan blackberry. So you can get more creative than this. I mean, this is just to kind of, mostly to get kids to kind of recognize plants more. Like I said, it's one of the most helpful ways to start to recognize plants. Plant blindness is actually a big issue that's kind of sweeping the world right now, where more and more people nowadays just can't recognize or what plants are when they see out in the world. So I think this is a great way just to kind of get started on a small scale. All right. So even though I call myself a scientist, I still find myself saying this a lot, is I have no idea what I'm looking at. And my biggest advice is just to invest in a local field guide, a plant book. The one on the bottom there, the Poajar McKinnon, is a really popular one locally. And that's if you want to kind of get more serious into plant identification. Otherwise, there's the Invasive Species Council of BC for the purposes of this workshop. They have lots of resources where you can see a lot of native alternatives to invasive species, and you can find out why certain invasive species are a problem and how to control them and what they look like, all that sort of thing. And if you still find yourself in a rut about what a plant is when you're looking at, is just to consult iNaturalist. It's an app where you can upload a photo and other naturalists can assess what the species is, and they can give you some feedback on what they think it is. And from my experience, it's been actually very helpful, and most of the time pretty accurate, as long as you have a good photograph or a series of photographs. All right, so thank you for all your interest in the event, and I hope today sparked some inspiration in you to make your own projects. I learned a lot while researching for today, and I will definitely be using plants in the future for some of my hobby art. If you end up using any techniques from this presentation, or if you're inspired to do any other art that's more complicated, but you were inspired from the things I showed you, please, we'd love to see it. You can upload your masterpieces to Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, and you can tag us at Maplewood Flats. And I look forward to seeing anything you guys put up. And one last thing before we go is that I would like to let you know about some other exciting upcoming events. This Sunday, July 26th, Senakula Wiss will lead a virtual plant scavenger hunt instead of her Indigenous plant walk that she usually does. She will teach you about invasive, so it's kind of a complement to this workshop, and plant families in your own backyard. And it'll be fun for the whole family, and I'm really excited to actually watch that myself. And then next Wednesday, July 29th at 6:30 p.m., there's going to be an event led by board member John Preisel, and he'll share his passion from the last 20 years of working with the bald eagle on Burnaby Mountain, the Chehalis Nation, and the coast. So yeah, if anybody has any questions, I'll try to look up in the chat if there's any other questions. But if you want to throw your questions out with your voice, you can do that too. Or if anybody wants to share any of their experiences with working with plants, I think everyone would appreciate your input. Yeah. So for the rubbing, for the watercolor, I used a thick paper. I didn't use too thick paper because I wanted the rubbing to show through the paper. I didn't choose for this one. Just kind of basic cardstock that I used, just because I wanted to get the outlines of the leaf veins, and I was afraid that if I use watercolor paper, it just wouldn't show up as easily. But like there's buckling, so I have to experiment more as well. And yeah, so that was the question from Roni, and she also asked Ronnie. Thank you. I saw your mouth and I was like, oh, I knew it. Have I ever tried making sun prints? You can buy photosensitive paper at a craft store. And yeah, I haven't done that, but that's really interesting. I'll have to look that up. Sun prints, so everyone can look at that too. And is bindweed the same as morning glory? Yeah, so I think morning glory is a type of bindweed. Bindweed, I think, the Invasive Species Council called it field bindweed, and there's common morning glory. I think a lot of people interchange the names, but when I look up on Google search for images, the morning glory has the flowers that are all colorful, like pink and deep blue and purple and that sort of thing, and then the bindweed have the white flowers. And
well, I seem to remember there being a slight variation in the Latin name for the white ones, which are the invasive ones.
Yeah.
The other kind, like the blue and purple. The pink ones are just some kind of modern cultivar.
Yeah, the white ones are definitely invasive.
Yeah, oh yeah.
We don't like
everywhere.
these.
I hate them.
No.
I'm at war with them.
Me too. My raspberry bush, my poor raspberry bush.
Everywhere.
Yeah, and tutorial for making the ink. Yeah, so yeah, this is my blackberry ink. I actually really like it. It's pretty simple to make, like I said. Be great for kids too. Yeah, thank you for putting some resources in the chat, everybody. Yeah, so Crystal PC asked if we could put the slides up somewhere. So the whole presentation, I don't know if you caught it at the beginning, it's being recorded and it's being simulcast through Facebook right now, and it'll be up on Facebook at least for the next 6 months. So you can watch the presentation again. If there's any details that you missed, you can email at, I can actually just message our Facebook page as well, actually, and we'll get back to you. Yeah, thank you for all your feedback, everybody. And question from Facebook: does that blackberry color stay the same or shift over time with UV light? So I haven't left it out in the sun, so I don't know if it's gonna change with UV light. But like I said, when I originally put it on here, I'll show. It was more of like a deeper purpley red, like this, and as it dried over the day, it became more of a deeper purplish color. Okay, so if there's no
vinegar to help, is the vinegar to help keep it color fast, just like when
yeah,
you're
that's great. Yeah,
new blue jeans in the washer?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it's mostly just for like the salt's for preservation, so it doesn't rot, and the vinegar is for preservation of color. Yeah. Yeah. Any more questions before I end it for today? All right. It was a short presentation, but I just wanted to give you guys some really easy techniques to use with your family and children and to get them interested, you know. All right. Thank you everybody for watching, and we'll end it here, and have a great day, you guys. Thank you.